But once the regime fell, certainty vanished faster than the money ever could. When Saddam Hussein's regime collapsed, a lot of people expected one thing almost immediately. The doors would swing open, the vaults would be counted, and the hidden fortune of a dictatorship would finally sit in plain view. Instead, the trail went muddy almost at once. There were stories about gold, rumours about cash stockpiles, talk of missing billions, but the closer people got to the money, the harder it was to say what was really there and what had already slipped into chaos. That's what makes this story so powerful and so frustrating. In the public imagination, a fallen ruler should leave behind neat piles of evidence bars of gold stacked in a room, safes packed with currency, palace basements full of proof. But real regime collapse doesn't look neat. It looks like ministries abandoned in a rush, records half kept or not kept at all, loyalists disappearing, and institutions that were supposed to count everything suddenly unable to count themselves, which raises the first hard question. How could so much wealth become so hard to trace so quickly? Part of the answer is simple, even if the scale is not. In a tightly controlled state, wealth doesn't move like it does in an open system with strong oversight and independent records. Power pulls money inward. State-controlled wealth, access to bank accounts, valuable assets, and the ability to direct resources all get concentrated around a small inner circle. And once that happens, secrecy stops being a side effect and becomes the system itself. You can picture the result without needing a single dramatic legend to be true. Palaces with locked rooms, office safes, official buildings where paper trails begin and end with the same few trusted hands, and decisions made inside a political world where loyalty mattered more than transparency. That secrecy was real, though it rarely left a simple trail. In that kind of environment, even ordinary accounting becomes opaque, so when people later speak of hidden wealth, they're often describing a real structure of concealment, but not always a clean treasure map. That's where the story starts to split. Some of the wealth linked to Saddam Hussein's Iraq would have been tied up in the state itself, not sitting as one secret mountain of gold waiting to be found. Some may have been portable, cash, valuables, reserves, assets shifted through loyal networks, things that can be moved faster than a government can fall apart on paper. And once war and collapse enter the picture, that difference matters, because money in ledgers, money in buildings, and money in human hands do not vanish in the same way. This is where hidden wealth stories become dangerous if we tell them too simply. The easiest version is that there was one giant cache, somebody found it first, and the mystery is just who took it. The more believable version is messier. Some assets were likely documented and seized, some were probably looted, some may have been moved before the system broke, and some missing billions may partly reflect the moment when records stopped matching reality. If you like history that gets under the skin of myths instead of just repeating them, subscribe, because this is exactly where the legend starts outrunning the ledger. And that ledger is the real battleground here. Before anyone can answer where Saddam Hussein's hidden wealth went, we have to separate what was last verifiably under regime control from everything claimed afterward. Because once the paper trail fractures, every empty room starts looking like evidence, and every rumour starts sounding like fact. Then the question became less what existed, and more who still held it. The mystery isn't just whether gold and cash existed in large amounts, it's who controlled the last confirmed trail before the collapse made certainty itself disappear. And that's where the flaw drops out. Once the invasion hit and institutions in Iraq began to buckle, the question stopped being, was there wealth? And became, who touched it last? In a collapsing state, money doesn't sit politely in ledgers. It gets rushed through hallways, locked in safes, shoved into vehicles, moved between ministries, palaces, bank rooms, and private compounds, and every move made in fear leaves the trail weaker than it was an hour earlier. That part matters, because some of Saddam Hussein's regime assets were never just rumour. There were real palaces, real government accounts, real state reserves, real stockpiles of currency, and a system built on secrecy. So when the regime began to break apart, the most believable scenario is not one giant treasure chest vanishing into the desert, but many different pools of wealth all becoming vulnerable at once. And the second that happened, the hunt split in two. What could be physically seized, and what could disappear before anyone even knew where to look. Some of it was tangible enough to put hands on. Coalition forces and Iraqi authorities did recover cash and seize regime-linked assets after the fall, and that's important because it keeps this story grounded. We are not dealing with pure folklore here. There really were recoveries, really were rooms and containers holding money, really were state assets tied to a system that had concentrated wealth behind guarded walls. But every confirmed stack of currency raised a sharper question in the same breath. If this much was found, how much had already moved before those doors were opened? What matters most is how quickly control fractured when the system collapsed. That's where the image people tend to miss becomes the most useful one. Don't picture a single vault swinging open with a clean answer inside. Picture a chain of custody breaking in real time. A desk abandoned, a safe opened by one set of hands and then another, a bank office with incomplete records, a palace room stripped of whatever had been there before, and outside, a city in shock where looters, officials, soldiers, middlemen, and frightened insiders all understood the same thing at once. Anything not nailed down had suddenly become contestable. And once that starts, fortunes can vanish without needing a master plan. Hidden reserves can be broken into smaller pieces. Cash can be carried without leaving much trace. Gold, if it existed in movable form, is even worse from an investigator's point of view because it is compact, easy to transfer, and easy to melt into a story no one can fully reconstruct later. If you think the missing wealth was mostly swallowed by that chaos rather than neatly hidden, hit like on the video, because that one question changes how you read every discovery that came afterward. The paper trail is where the legend gets inflated. In wartime, records go missing. Custodians disappear, false paperwork becomes useful, and ordinary theft blends with official seizures so quickly that later retellings can make every gap sound deliberate. That's how missing billions enters the story with such force. Some of it may point to real losses, some to wealth moved before the fall, some to looting and corruption after it, and some to estimates that grew larger precisely because nobody could audit the wreckage cleanly. So the truth sits somewhere between confirmed seizures and permanent disappearance. So what happened to Saddam Hussein's hidden wealth? The clearest answer is frustrating, but stronger than myth. Some assets were real and were found or seized. Some almost certainly slipped away through smuggling, private networks, looting, and broken oversight. And some of what people still picture as a hidden fortune may be the product of a shattered system where gold, cash, and bank-linked assets became impossible to separate neatly once the regime collapsed, which leaves the hardest question still hanging there. Not whether money vanished, but who turned chaos into opportunity before the books could ever be closed. That's where the hunt stopped looking like a treasure story and started looking like an accounting disaster. Investigators had real things to work with at first. Regime assets that could be frozen abroad, palaces and state buildings that might still hold records, bank-linked trails that in theory should have shown where at least some of the money had gone. But each time the search reached for something solid, the ground seemed to give way under it, because freezing assets is not the same as proving ownership, and finding a safe or a ledger is not the same as knowing what was inside it before the doors were opened. That gap matters more than it sounds. In a collapsing regime, a file cabinet can be burned, a hard drive can vanish, a bank contact can deny everything, and a witness can tell 3 different versions of the same story depending on who is asking. So when people imagine one final vault being cracked open to reveal Saddam Hussein's hidden wealth, the reality is colder than that. Rooms had been entered by different hands, records were incomplete, and by the time outside, investigators started piecing things together, some of the best evidence may already have been carried out in boxes, rewritten on paper, or buried under politics. And all of it unfolded under pressure to project order over confusion. Politics sat over the whole search like a lid. Governments wanted to show they were restoring order, not advertise how messy the money trail really was. Iraqi institutions were trying to survive. Foreign authorities were dealing with frozen assets and legal claims, and every side had reasons to emphasise some discoveries and stay quiet about other uncertainties. If you think stories like this matter because they show what power looks like when it panics, hit like on the video, because the most revealing part isn't just what was hidden in palaces or bank accounts. It's how fast the truth itself became contested once the regime fell. That's also why unreliable leads multiplied so fast. One rumour says gold was moved before the collapse. Another says cash stockpiles were looted in the chaos. Another points to secret accounts, loyal intermediaries, or fortunes scattered through front companies and private networks. Some of those ideas are plausible in a broad sense. Regimes under pressure do move money, hide assets, and use layers of deniability. But plausible is not the same thing as proven, and this story keeps breaking right at that line, where rumour sounds detailed enough to repeat, but not strong enough to survive scrutiny. The murkiness wasn't an accident of storytelling after the fact. It was built into the conditions on the ground. Corruption, Missing records, damaged institutions, competing chains of authority, and a public already primed to believe that somewhere there had to be a final mountain of gold and cash waiting to be found. Which is why every discovery, or absence, kept feeding a larger myth. In that kind of atmosphere, even real discoveries can feed bad conclusions. A recovered asset becomes evidence of a much larger secret reserve. An empty office becomes proof that everything was smuggled away. A seized account becomes the start of a legend about missing billions, and the legend grows faster than the paperwork ever can. So what's the best answer left standing if we strip away the fantasy and keep only what fits the evidence? Most likely, some wealth was recovered or frozen. Some was almost certainly dispersed in the collapse through looting, private networks, rushed transfers, and opportunists moving faster than any audit team ever could. And some assets may well have been hidden successfully beyond immediate reach, not as one neat buried treasure, but as fragments scattered across people, papers, accounts, favours, and places where the trail simply went thin. That means the mystery never resolves into a single chest of gold with Saddam Hussein's name on it. The clearest answer is messier and, in a way, more disturbing. Hidden wealth doesn't just disappear. It gets broken apart by war, secrecy, corruption, and confusion until no one can fully reconstruct the whole picture. If you've made it this far, subscribe and tell me what you think happened to the unresolved billions. Mostly recovered, mostly stolen in the chaos, or successfully hidden before the fall. Because the real lesson here is that when a regime collapses, money can vanish almost as completely as the records meant to track it.